I couldn't believe my ears. The words echoed through the quiet dining room like a sharp knife cutting through the last remnants of hope I had left. Do you really think I want to help you too? My mother-in-law, Margaret, smiled with a hidden meaning, but her gaze was cold and terrifying. I stared at her, a chill creeping up my spine. What do you mean? Don't you want me and James to be happy? She didn't respond right away, simply observing me as if I were a pawn that had made the wrong move. Then she spoke, each word slow and deliberate, making it hard to breathe. Your happiness doesn't fit into this family's plan, Laura. Her words tore apart the thin veil of trust I'd been holding on to all this time. I had always thought that James's family was my family, that together we would face any challenges. But now I realized I was just a pawn in a game they had already set up. A sense of dizziness overwhelmed me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Inside, I made my decision. Nothing would stop me from protecting my happiness and my future. And if Margaret thought I would just stand by and let them invade my life, she was sorely mistaken. I used to believe that love could conquer anything. When I first met James, everything seemed perfect. He was kind, handsome, and thoughtful, the man I had always dreamed of. We had an effortless connection, something that many people only read about in romance novels. We built our world together, one step at a time. And then there was his family. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, it was only natural for James to want to stay close to his family, right? His mother, Margaret, was a woman of grace and elegance, someone who appeared to possess an air of authority in every room she entered. When I first met her, I thought she was everything a mother should be: protective, loving, and proud of her son. But that was before I realized how deep her control ran. I remember the first time I noticed something was off. We had only been married for a few months, still in the honeymoon phase of our relationship. James and I were hosting a small dinner at our apartment, just a few close friends, and of course, his mother. I was excited. After all, this was the first time my mother-in-law would see how happy I was in our home. As I was setting the table, arranging the wine glasses just the way James liked them, Margaret wandered into the kitchen, her eyes immediately scanning the space, taking note of every detail. "You've arranged everything just like how James likes it," she remarked, her tone seemingly innocent, yet there was an undercurrent that I couldn't quite place. "It's good to see you're keeping up with the little things." I smiled nervously, trying to brush off the comment, but I could feel something in the air shift. "Of course, James is very particular about his food and his space. I want to make sure he's comfortable," I replied, my voice strained. Margaret paused, her gaze narrowing. "And are you making sure he's comfortable in other ways, too?" Her question sent a chill down my spine. It was one of those questions that could easily be mistaken for harmless small talk, but I knew better. There was an edge to her words, a subtle but undeniable scrutiny. I tried to laugh it off, unsure of how to respond, but James walked in at that exact moment, and the conversation was quickly brushed aside. As the night wore on, I began to notice more subtle comments from Margaret, each one disguised as a compliment or a suggestion, but I could see through the mask of politeness. She wasn't trying to help, she was trying to control. The tipping point came a few weeks later. James and I had planned a weekend getaway to celebrate our anniversary. It was meant to be our time, a chance to reconnect and escape the pressures of everyday life. But just as we were about to leave, Margaret appeared at our doorstep, a disapproving look etched across her face. "James, I've been thinking," she began, her voice sweet but firm. "Perhaps it's time for you to reconsider this trip. There's a lot of work that needs to be done at the family estate, and I'm sure your father would appreciate your help." I could feel my heart drop. The look in James's eyes said it all. He was torn. "I really think this is something we need, Mom," he said, his voice soft but resolute. But his hesitation was all I needed to know. The weight of her expectations was bearing down on him, and the freedom we had just started to build together was slipping away. I watched as he reluctantly agreed to stay home for the weekend. It was as though I wasn't even in the room anymore. He didn't fight it, and neither did she. That's when I realized James's loyalty to his family went beyond love for me. It was something deeper, something ingrained in him that I had never fully understood until that moment. After that weekend, things started to change. Margaret's visits became more frequent, and with each one, she grew bolder in her attempts to invade our personal space. I no longer felt like the woman I had been when we first met. I felt small, overshadowed by a mother-in-law who was determined to make me feel like an outsider in my own home. One evening, as I sat in the living room waiting for James to return from a meeting, I overheard a conversation between James and his mother through the phone. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but soon I heard Margaret's voice clearly, her tone icy and calculating. "I just don't think she's the right fit for this family, James," she said, her words cutting through the silence. "I've tried to be patient, but she's not fitting in. She doesn't know her place, and if you don't do something soon, things will only get worse." I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen, unable to believe what I was hearing. Was this really happening? Did his mother truly think I was unworthy of being part of the family? James's response was a soft murmur, too quiet for me to hear clearly, but the words that followed sent a wave of nausea through me. "I'll talk to her, Mom," he said, "but I'm not sure what else to do. You know how things are." I wanted to scream, to march into the room and confront both of them, but I stayed still, rooted to the spot. A part of me was in denial. Another part of me, one that I didn't want to acknowledge, knew this was only the beginning. From that moment on, I knew the fight I was about to face wasn't just about winning James's heart. It was about proving that I could survive in a family that had already decided my fate. And though it seemed impossible, I was determined not to let them take away everything I had fought for. Little did I know, the battle had only just begun. It was only a matter of time before the tension between me and Margaret reached its boiling point. The more I tried to assert myself, the tighter her grip seemed to become. I couldn't understand why she was so determined to drive a wedge between James and me. Wasn't I the one who loved him? Wasn't I the one who had stood by his side through every challenge, every triumph? Yet, for some reason, it felt like she was fighting a battle that I didn't even know I was a part of. The next few weeks passed in a blur of awkward family gatherings and strained conversations. Every time I tried to have a moment with James, Margaret found a way to insert herself into it. She would call him during dinner, send messages at all hours of the night, and even show up uninvited to our weekend plans. Her presence was suffocating, and I could feel the walls closing in. It wasn't until one Saturday evening that I realized just how far things had gone. James and I had planned a quiet dinner at home, just the two of us. I had cooked his favorite meal, something simple but thoughtful. I wanted to reconnect with him, to remind him of the love that had brought us together. But as we sat down to eat, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened the door, there she was, Margaret, standing with that all-too-familiar smug smile on her face. She didn't even ask if it was a bad time. She just walked right in, as though the house belonged to her. "James," she said in a voice that didn't mask her displeasure, "I thought we could have a little chat. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." I glanced at James, who was already looking uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. He could never say no to his mother. He never had. That's when it hit me, this wasn't just about me or our relationship anymore. This was about control, and Margaret was determined to keep the strings in her hands. I forced a smile and nodded. "Of course, Mom, please sit down." We were just about to start dinner. She settled in effortlessly, as though she had done this 100 times before. I could feel the coldness in the air, the unspoken tension hanging like a thick fog. Margaret made herself comfortable, as if it were normal for her to interrupt our private moments, and James, as usual, didn't say a word. Dinner passed in a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. Every time I tried to speak to James, Margaret would jump in with her own comments or suggestions. And I noticed something else. She was starting to give James instructions on things I had always handled. "You should really take care of the garden more often," she said, looking at me with a slight tilt of her head. "It's not just about the house. You need to think about the estate too, James." Her words stung, not because of the garden, but because of the implication that she didn't think I was capable of managing things for us. She was planting seeds of doubt in his mind, and I couldn't let that continue. After dinner, I retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. I was fuming, but I didn't want to show it. I had to keep my cool. But just as I was about to grab a glass of water, James walked in, his face downcast. "Laura, we need to talk," he said quietly. I crossed my arms, trying to keep my emotions in check. "About what?" I'm not sure what to do anymore," he muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. "Mom keeps pushing, and I can feel her pulling me in different directions. I don't know how to make her stop." I felt my heart sink. James, she's not just pushing you, she's trying to control everything. And I can't keep living like this, with her always getting in the middle of everything we do. She's been overstepping for months. He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. I know, but it's not easy. You don't understand how she can be sometimes. She just wants what's best for me, for us. I clenched my fists, my anger bubbling up. What's best for us, James? What's best for us is to have a life that's ours, not one dictated by your mother. There was a long silence between us. I could feel the weight of his indecision, but I could also feel something else, something deeper. The love I had once seen in his eyes had begun to fade, replaced by doubt. Doubt that had been planted by Margaret's manipulative tactics. I'm not sure what to do, he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. James, I love you, but if you don't start standing up for us, standing up for me, then I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting. He flinched at my words, as if the weight of what I had said had finally hit him. But before he could respond, the sound of Margaret's voice called out from the living room. James, can you come here for a minute? I need your help with something. He hesitated for a moment, looking at me as though torn. But then, just like always, he left, leaving me standing there alone with my thoughts and my frustration. I couldn't wait any longer for him to come to his senses. If I wanted things to change, I would have to take matters into my own hands. The next day, I began to plan. I couldn't just sit around and wait for things to fall apart. Margaret had been chipping away at our marriage for too long, and I wasn't going to let her win. It was time for me to fight back. But I knew that if I was going to outsmart her, I had to be careful. Every move had to be strategic. Every word had to be calculated. I had to make sure I was one step ahead, and I would. Because I wasn't going to let her tear apart the life I had built with James, not without a fight. The morning after our conversation, I woke up with a new resolve. James's indecision, his inability to confront his mother, was becoming unbearable. I could no longer wait for him to realize what was at stake. If I wanted our marriage to survive, if I wanted to keep my life in my own hands, I had to do something. I had to outsmart Margaret. And for that, I needed to understand her, what made her tick, what her weaknesses were, and how far she was willing to go. I had always thought that Margaret was simply a protective mother, that she was looking out for her son. But now, I saw her for what she truly was. A woman determined to control everything in her path, even if it meant tearing apart the people closest to her. What I didn't know, what James didn't see, was just how deep her obsession with power ran. It wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about me. It was about the family's legacy, the wealth, the influence, and the control over everything they touched. I started paying closer attention to Margaret's actions, watching how she moved in the world, how she interacted with James and the rest of the family. I had always thought her smile was warm, her words polite, but now I realized how carefully she had constructed her persona. It was a facade, a mask she wore to hide the manipulative, calculating woman beneath. A few days later, I found myself at a family gathering, a dinner that Margaret had orchestrated. The family estate, a sprawling mansion nestled just outside the city, was where I felt the most out of place. I had never felt comfortable in their world, the world of wealth and tradition. It was a place where appearances mattered more than reality, where everyone was playing a part. James was already there when I arrived, speaking to some of his relatives in the grand dining room. I felt the familiar unease settle in my chest as I walked through the doors, but this time, it was different. I was different. I wasn't the naive girl who had married her perfect man. I wasn't the shy, uncertain woman who had once let his family walk all over her. I had a plan now. As I entered the room, Margaret's sharp eyes immediately caught mine. There was a flicker of something, recognition, suspicion, perhaps even wariness. But she masked it with that ever-present smile, the one that made everyone believe she was a saint. "Laura, darling," she said, her voice as smooth as honey. "So glad you could make it. James has been telling me how hard you've been working lately. You're such a devoted wife." I smiled back, though every word out of her mouth felt like a jab. "Thank you, Margaret. It's important to me to take care of my husband," I replied, my voice steady. The room fell into a tense silence for a moment, but Margaret didn't miss a beat. She smoothly changed the subject, diving into a conversation about the estate's future, about the legacy she wanted to preserve, the business decisions that were looming, and the changes that needed to be made. It wasn't long before I realized the true purpose of the dinner. This wasn't just a family gathering. It was a strategy session, one where Margaret was laying the groundwork for something far more sinister. She was trying to manipulate everyone into supporting her vision, her agenda. She wanted James to take control of the family business, but she also wanted to ensure that I would be sidelined, pushed out of the picture completely. As I sat there, listening to her carefully chosen words, I could see the plan unfolding. This wasn't about family, it was about power, about control over everything that mattered. The conversation drifted, and I was left alone with my thoughts, watching Margaret and James from across the room. It was then that I saw it. The subtle glances, the way Margaret would touch James's arm just a little too familiarly, the way he would nod along with her every word without question. My heart sank as I realized how deep her influence ran. This wasn't just a mother's love for her son, it was something darker, something more possessive. I excused myself from the table, stepping outside to the garden for a moment to clear my head. The evening air was cool, and for a moment I closed my eyes, trying to calm the storm that was raging inside me. I had to take control of this situation, and I had to do it now. I couldn't afford to be passive anymore. Margaret's web of lies and manipulation was suffocating me, and I had to find a way to break free. As I walked along the path, I saw a figure standing in the shadows near the garden gate. It was James, alone, looking out at the city lights in the distance. I approached quietly, unsure of what to say. When he turned around and saw me, his face softened. "I'm glad you're here," he said, his voice sincere but tinged with guilt. I swallowed my frustration. "James, we need to talk." He nodded and led me to a bench near the fountain, where we sat in silence for a few moments. I could feel the tension building, the weight of everything I was about to say. "I don't know how to keep doing this," I began, my voice steady. "I feel like I'm losing you. I feel like we're losing each other because of her." James sighed, running his hand through his hair. I know I've been distant, but you have to understand, my mother, she's been like this for as long as I can remember. She's always had control over everything." "I get that, James," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "But you need to understand that this isn't just about her anymore. It's about us. It's about me and you. You have to make a choice." He looked at me, his eyes full of uncertainty. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you have to decide if you're going to keep letting her control everything, or if you're going to stand up for us." There was a long pause, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to be the man I needed him to be, but he was still trapped in the web of his mother's influence. I knew that breaking free wouldn't be easy. It would take time, effort, and most importantly, courage. But I was ready. I had no choice but to be, because if I didn't fight now, I would lose everything, and I couldn't let that happen. "I'm not going to give up on us, James," I said, my voice resolute. "But you have to decide where you stand, with me, or with her." James didn't answer immediately, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. I had planted the seed. Now, I just had to wait and see if it would grow. It was late that night when I got home, the house eerily silent. I tried to sleep, but the events of the evening kept replaying in my mind. The dinner with Margaret, the subtle manipulations, and James's indecision, it was all starting to wear on me. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. I had already taken the first step by confronting James, but now it was up to him to make his move. The following days passed in a blur. James was quieter than usual, lost in his thoughts. He didn't bring up our conversation from the garden, and I didn't press him to. Instead, I waited, watching, planning. I knew that if I was going to break the hold Margaret had over him, I would need more than just words. I would need actions. I would need to show him that life with me could be different, could be free from her control. But how? Then, one evening, I got my answer. It was a Saturday afternoon when James came home earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when I heard the door open. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the doorway, his face unreadable. I turned around, my heart racing. "James," I said cautiously, "is everything okay?" He walked toward me slowly, his hands in his pockets, his eyes avoiding mine. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low. I held my breath. This was it, the moment that would either break us or fix everything. "What about?" "About everything," he replied, his gaze finally meeting mine. "About what you said the other night. About my mom, about us." I didn't speak, afraid that any words might disrupt the fragile moment. He sighed and sat down at the kitchen table, running his fingers through his hair. I know I've been distant, he continued. I've been letting her control so much of our lives, and I've been too weak to see it. But I see it now. I see what it's doing to us. I exhaled slowly, the weight in my chest easing slightly, but I didn't want to get my hopes up just yet. James, I've been trying to tell you this for months. You have to choose her or me. I know, he said quietly, and I've been afraid of losing her. But I'm more afraid of losing you. His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had no idea how much it had cost him to come to that realization. I had always thought he was the strong one, but in that moment, I saw his vulnerability, his fear of disappointing his mother, and his love for me. I've been giving her too much power, he admitted. She's been using me, using us, and I've let her, but not anymore. I'm going to put a stop to it. I'm going to set boundaries, with her, with everyone. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. This was the moment I had been waiting for, but now that it was here, I realized how much was at stake. James was finally ready to stand up to his mother, but doing so would come with consequences that neither of us was fully prepared for. What are you going to do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know yet, he said, standing up and walking toward me. But I promise you, Laura, I'm going to make this right. I'm going to protect you, protect us. I could see the determination in his eyes. He was finally ready to fight, not just for our marriage, but for our future. And in that moment, I realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter for us. But as much as I wanted to believe in his promise, I knew that Margaret wouldn't just let go. Her power over him, over us, had been built over years. She wouldn't give up without a fight, and I wasn't sure how far she would go to regain control. The following week, things started to change. James began to take small steps toward independence, slowly distancing himself from his mother's influence. He stopped answering her calls immediately, took a more active role in our home, and began to stand firm when she pushed for decisions that he didn't agree with. I could feel the shift in the air, a palpable tension between James and Margaret. She wasn't happy, but she didn't show her cards just yet. Then, one afternoon, I received a call from James. His voice was strained, urgent. Laura, we need to talk, he said, his words rushing out. It's about my mother. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. What happened? I confronted her, he said, sounding exhausted. I told her that things had to change, that I couldn't keep living under her thumb, and she didn't take it well. My heart raced. What did she say? She said that if I didn't choose her, if I didn't fall in line with her plans, she would make sure I lost everything. Everything, our family, our inheritance, everything I've worked for. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I knew that Margaret was capable of cruelty, but hearing her threats confirmed everything I feared. She wasn't going to let go easily. This was about power, and she wasn't afraid to destroy anyone who stood in her way. What are we going to do? I asked, my voice trembling. We're going to fight, James said firmly. I don't care what she threatens. I'm not going to let her tear us apart. I'm going to stand by you, Laura, I swear it. But as I listened to his words, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much more complicated. Margaret wouldn't give up without a fight, and I wasn't sure how far she was willing to go to keep control. One thing was certain, the battle for our future had only just begun. The days that followed James's decision to confront his mother felt like a strange mix of hope and dread. On the surface, everything seemed calmer. James was trying to keep his distance from Margaret, and we were finally spending more time together, something that had become rare over the past few months. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this peace was only temporary. Margaret wasn't the type to back down easily, and she was far from a passive player in this battle. We spent the next few days discussing our options, weighing the consequences of taking a stand against Margaret. James had already told me about the threats she'd made, but as we sat in the living room, I could see the fear still lingering in his eyes. He was torn between his loyalty to the family he'd known all his life and the woman he loved, who was now demanding that he take a stand. I could feel the tension building between us, a pressure in the air that neither of us could escape. James wanted to believe that everything would be fine, that his mother would eventually accept our decision and move on. But I knew better. Margaret didn't give up control so easily. James, we can't keep pretending that everything's okay, I said one evening after dinner. We were sitting on the couch, but it felt like there was an invisible wall between us. She's not going to back off, and you can't keep avoiding her. He looked at me, his face troubled. I know, I don't want to lose everything. I don't want to lose her, too. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. I know, love, but you have to decide. We can't keep living like this, torn between two worlds. If you keep trying to please her, you're going to lose yourself. And I can't watch that happen. His gaze softened, and for a moment I thought he might finally understand. But then, just as quickly, a shadow crossed his face. I don't know if I'm ready to lose her, he said quietly. The words hit me harder than I expected. I had hoped that he was finally ready to break free, to take control of his own life. But there it was again, the pull of his mother's power over him, a tie that went deeper than I had realized. I felt my heart sink. This wasn't just a battle with Margaret, it was a battle with everything James had been taught to value: his family, his inheritance, and his loyalty. It wasn't something he could easily give up. I don't want you to lose her, James, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I need you to see the truth. If you don't start standing up for us, we'll never have a chance. We'll be stuck in her shadow forever. The room fell silent, and I could hear the tension crackling in the air. Finally, James sighed and leaned back against the couch, his hand still holding mine, but now it felt heavier than before. I don't know what to do, Laura, he admitted, his voice raw. I don't know if I can fight her, but I can't lose you either. I nodded, feeling my heart ache with his words. He was torn, caught between the life he had known and the one he wanted to build with me, and I understood that. But we couldn't keep going on like this. I couldn't keep waiting for him to make a decision. We're in this together, James, I said softly. But I need you to be all in. You have to choose us or her. He didn't answer right away, and the silence between us was thick with unspoken fears. It was as if we both knew that whatever decision he made, everything would change. There was no turning back after this. The next day, everything took a turn. James received a call from his mother, an urgent one, with her usual cold, controlling tone. I could tell by the look on his face when he hung up the phone that something had changed. She's demanding that we meet, he said, his voice tense. She wants to talk, to discuss things. I didn't need to ask what things. I knew exactly what Margaret was planning. She wouldn't let go without a fight, and this meeting was just the beginning of her next move. We can't go to her, I said immediately, my voice firm. We can't keep playing her game, James. But he hesitated. I have to at least hear her out. Maybe we can come to some kind of agreement. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. There is no agreement to be made, James. She's not interested in compromise. She's interested in control. She'll use anything she can to manipulate you. He stared at the floor, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. I could see the struggle on his face, the war between his love for me and his fear of losing his family. The weight of the decision was more than he could bear alone, and I could feel the pressure mounting on both of us. I can't keep doing this, I said, my voice softer now. You have to make a choice, and you have to make it soon. I can't wait forever. James's gaze lifted, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something in his eyes, a glimmer of determination. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to take control of his own life. But there was a sense of urgency in his eyes, too. He knew what was at stake, and he knew that once he made his decision, there would be no going back. We'll meet her, he said finally, his voice steady. But this time, things will be different. I'll stand my ground. I nodded, though my heart wasn't entirely at ease. I knew that standing his ground would be harder than he thought, especially against someone like Margaret. But I also knew that if he didn't, we would both be trapped forever. Just promise me one thing, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Promise me you won't let her take us down, that you'll fight for us. James squeezed my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. I promise, Laura, I won't let her win, not this time. I could only hope that he was right, because deep down, I knew that if we didn't stand together now, we might never have the chance again. The next evening, we drove to Margaret's house, the tension between us palpable. The drive was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts, knowing that what happened next would change everything. The storm was coming, and I wasn't sure if we would survive it. But I was ready. I had to be, because if we didn't fight now, we would lose everything, our love, our future, and maybe even each other. As we drove to Margaret's estate, the weight of what we were about to face settled heavily on my shoulders. The air in the car was thick with unspoken words, and though James kept glancing at me every now and then, I could see the storm brewing in his eyes. He was no longer the man who had allowed his mother to control his life. But I wasn't sure if he was ready to take the final step into the unknown. His promise to fight for us still hung in the air between us like a fragile thread. We arrived at Margaret's mansion just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the vast, manicured grounds. The house loomed before us, cold, imposing, a symbol of everything that had been driving a wedge between us for so long. I could feel the walls closing in the moment I stepped out of the car. This was it. There was no turning back now. James looked at me, his jaw set, determination written across his face. "I'll do the talking," he said quietly. His voice was steady, but there was an underlying tension that told me he was as nervous as I was. I nodded, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I had no idea how this would end, but one thing was certain. If we were going to survive this, we had to stand together. We walked up to the door, and before I could even knock, Margaret appeared, her figure framed by the dim light behind her. She looked every bit the matriarch she had always been, elegant, poised, her expression unreadable. "James, Laura," she greeted us, her voice smooth but laced with something colder than I'd ever heard before. "I'm glad you could join me. Please come in." There was no warmth in her voice, no attempt to ease the tension. I could feel the storm brewing, but I had no idea just how fierce it would be. James stepped forward, but I stayed close behind him, a quiet strength, ready to back him up if he faltered. We followed her into the grand living room, where she had clearly been expecting us. The air was thick with anticipation. Margaret gestured for us to sit. I glanced around at the lavishly decorated space, furniture that seemed more about showing off wealth than comfort. It felt sterile, like everything in her life had been arranged to fit her vision of perfection. But there was nothing perfect about the situation we found ourselves in. James sat first, and I joined him. Margaret took her seat across from us, folding her hands in her lap, her gaze fixed on James. "So, James," she began, her tone still calm but with a sharp edge, "I trust you've thought about what I said. You can't just abandon your responsibilities. The family, the estate, your future, these things matter, you know, and I've worked hard to build them." I could feel the tension rise between us. James shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but he didn't look away. This time, he wasn't the boy who had been too afraid to stand up to her. "I'm not abandoning anything, Mother," he said, his voice steady, but I could see the tightness in his jaw. "But things need to change. I'm not going to let you control my life anymore. I have a family now, and I'm putting them first. That means making decisions for myself, not for you." Margaret's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and her lips curled into a thin smile. "You're not putting her first, James. You're throwing away everything we've built for a fleeting moment of rebellion. Do you really think she's going to be able to help you with the responsibilities you have? You're nothing without this family. Don't forget that." I could feel my blood boiling at her words. She was so confident, so sure of her power over him. But James wasn't the same man he had been before. He was different now, and he wasn't going to let her tear him apart again. "Enough, Mother," James said, his voice firm. "I've heard enough. I've spent my entire life living under your shadow, and I'm done. Laura and I are building something that's ours. You're not going to take that away from me, and you're not going to manipulate me anymore." Margaret's gaze hardened, her fingers tightening around the armrest. For a moment, I thought she might lash out, but instead, she leaned back in her chair, her expression cold and calculating. "You think you can walk away from all of this," she said, her voice low, a dangerous calm in her tone. "You think you can turn your back on everything I've given you? You're not strong enough to do this, James. You've always been weak, always seeking approval from others. You'll never be able to survive without me." I felt my pulse quicken. Her words were like daggers, trying to pierce the fragile shell of confidence James had built up. But I wasn't about to let her tear him down again. I reached for his hand, giving it a tight squeeze, a silent promise that I would stand by him no matter what. "James is strong, Margaret," I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling up inside me. "Stronger than you think, and will survive without you. He doesn't need your approval, not anymore." Margaret's eyes flicked to me, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're so sure of yourselves," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "But you're both foolish. You think you can take control, think you can build a life without me? You're just playing a dangerous game. You'll regret this." The silence in the room was suffocating. For a moment, I thought the conversation was over, that Margaret would finally back down. But the tension hung in the air, thick and unrelenting. She wasn't done. Not yet. "I've spent my life building this family, this legacy. she continued, her voice rising ever so slightly. And if I have to destroy everything to make sure it stays in my hands, I will. Don't think I won't. I won't let you ruin what I've worked so hard for. Her words cut through the silence, each one a threat. I knew then that this wasn't going to end easily. Margaret wasn't going to just walk away. She was going to fight dirty, and she wouldn't stop until she had crushed everything in her path. I could see James's face tighten as the weight of her threats sank in, but he wasn't backing down. He stood up, his posture rigid with resolve. I don't care what you do, Mother, he said, his voice sharp. I'm done. This is our life now, and I'm not going to let you ruin it. I stood with him, feeling the strength of his resolve fill me, giving me the courage to face Margaret head-on. We were in this together, and nothing was going to tear us apart. Margaret sat there, her expression unreadable, her hands clasped in her lap. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, she finally spoke, her voice cold and low. This isn't over, James, she said, her eyes locking onto his. I'll make sure you regret this, you'll see. And with that, she stood up, her movements graceful and deliberate. But there was no warmth in her gestures, no motherly affection. There was only the coldness of a woman who had lost control, a woman who would stop at nothing to reclaim it. As she turned and walked out of the room, I knew that this was just the beginning of a battle we had no choice but to fight. Margaret wouldn't let go so easily, but neither would we. We had made our choice. Now, we would fight for our future, no matter what it took. The days following our confrontation with Margaret were filled with a quiet, unsettling tension. On the surface, everything seemed calm. James and I tried to return to normal life, but there was an undercurrent of dread hanging between us, a constant reminder that the battle had only just begun. We had made our stand, but Margaret had made it clear that she wasn't going to back down without a fight. And I could feel it, like a storm on the horizon, growing closer with every passing moment. It wasn't long before the first sign of her retaliation arrived. It came in the form of a phone call, one I had been dreading but couldn't avoid. James had stepped out for a meeting, leaving me at home to catch up on some work. I had just settled in when the phone rang, the caller ID showing a number I didn't recognize. My stomach churned as I answered, instinctively knowing who it was. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady despite the anxiety creeping up on me. The voice on the other end was sharp, controlled, and instantly recognizable. It was Margaret. "Laura," she said, her tone dripping with thinly veiled hostility. "I hope you're enjoying your little victory, but I've been thinking." I didn't interrupt, but my fingers tightened around the phone. "What do you want, Margaret?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I want you to know that this isn't over. You've crossed a line, and I'm not going to let you tear this family apart. You'll regret this, Laura, I promise you." The silence that followed felt suffocating. I could hear her breathing on the other end, the quiet rage building in her voice. "What are you going to do?" I asked, trying to keep my composure, but the words felt thin, hollow. I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't a threat she was going to forget so easily. "Do. Oh, I think you'll see soon enough," she replied, her voice cold and menacing. "But I'll give you a preview. You may have won today, but I'll make sure you lose everything. You'll lose James, you'll lose everything that you think matters to you. And then, maybe you'll realize just how out of your depth you really are." The phone call ended abruptly, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, my heart racing. My mind was reeling from her words. She wasn't done. I had known that, but hearing it from her directly made it all the more real. I had no idea what she was planning, but I could sense it in my bones. Whatever it was going to be ugly. When James returned home that evening, I couldn't hide the worry on my face. He noticed immediately, his expression softening. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting his briefcase down. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. Finally, I spoke. "It's your mother," she called. He stiffened, his jaw tightening. "What did she say?" "She's not backing down. She made it very clear that she'll do whatever it takes to destroy everything we've built," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "She's threatening to make us lose everything, James. She's going to come after us." His face hardened, and for a moment I saw a flash of the man I had always known. A man determined, unwilling to be controlled. "I won't let her win," he said firmly. "I won't let her tear us apart." But even as he spoke those words, I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. He wasn't entirely sure how to fight this fight, and I knew that Margaret's hold on him was still strong. She had spent years building her power, her influence, and now it was coming crashing down on us. The next few days passed in a tense haze. We tried to go about our routine, but every phone call, every knock at the door felt like it could be another attack from Margaret. I could see the strain in James's eyes, the weight of the pressure bearing down on him. He wanted to fight for us, but the threat of losing everything he had known, the legacy, the family, the wealth, was a heavy burden to bear. And then the first blow came. It was a letter, delivered in the middle of the afternoon, with a simple envelope bearing the family crest. When I opened it, I felt my stomach drop. The letter was from Margaret's lawyer. In it, she threatened legal action, demanding that James relinquish control of the family estate and business, citing his failure to fulfill his duties and reckless behavior. She claimed that he was putting everything at risk by choosing to be with me, and that the inheritance was at stake because of his unwise decisions. She accused me of manipulating him and ruining his life, and demanded that James return to the family fold or face a drawn-out legal battle. I showed the letter to James, and I could see the color drain from his face as he read through it. He sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "This is insane," he muttered, staring at the paper. "She's trying to destroy everything." I sat next to him, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me. "She's not just trying to destroy us, James. She's trying to take everything. She'll use whatever she can to tear us apart." He looked at me, his eyes pained. "I don't know what to do anymore. I can't lose you, Laura, but I can't lose everything I've known either." I reached out, taking his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the reality of what we were facing settling in. This wasn't just a fight for our marriage, it was a fight for our future, for everything we had built together. "We're in this together, James," I said softly, "and we'll fight this together. We'll find a way to get through this. We can't let her win." He nodded, his grip tightening on my hand. "I won't let her win, I swear it." But even as he said those words, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. Margaret wasn't going to give up, and we were about to find out just how far she would go to regain control. The battle had only just begun, and I was more determined than ever to protect what we had, no matter the cost. The following weeks felt like a never-ending roller coaster. Margaret's lawyer had filed a formal complaint, escalating the legal battle, and things were getting ugly. The letters, the phone calls, and even her public attempts to turn family members against us, every day seemed to bring something new. What started as a war of words was quickly morphing into something much darker. But as much as we tried to fight back, there was a nagging feeling in my chest. This wasn't just about the estate or the family business anymore. Margaret wasn't just trying to ruin us financially. She was out for something far more insidious: control. James and I spent hours going over legal documents, hiring our own attorney, trying to stay one step ahead. I could see the toll it was taking on him. He was no longer the man I had married, the confident, loving man. He had become someone weighed down by guilt, doubt, and the pressure of fighting his own mother. His every move was calculated, his every decision filled with uncertainty. It was heartbreaking to watch the man I loved so much falter under the strain. One evening, after another long day of legal battles, we sat in the living room, both exhausted. The weight of it all hung in the air, thick and suffocating. James was pacing back and forth, clearly on edge. His thoughts were miles away, his mind occupied with the overwhelming burden of the fight ahead. "We can't keep doing this," he said suddenly, his voice strained. "I'm losing everything. My family, my business, you, this isn't how it's supposed to be. I should have seen this coming, Laura. I should have put my foot down long ago." I stood up from the couch and walked over to him, my heart aching at the sight of his pain. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away, running his fingers through his hair in frustration. "I can't lose you, but I can't lose my family either," he said, his voice cracking. "This is killing me." I grabbed his arm, stopping him in his tracks. "James, look at me," I said firmly. "We've already lost so much, and we're still fighting. You're not losing your family, you're standing up to it, you're doing the right thing. We'll figure this out together, okay?" But he didn't meet my gaze. Instead, he looked down, his face clouded with frustration. "You don't understand, Laura. This isn't just about me or you. This is about everything I've ever known. My legacy, my future. I can't just throw that away. I don't know who I am without all of that." "James," I said, my voice softening, "you are more than your family's legacy. You're more than what they've made you feel you should be. You've spent your whole life living up to their expectations. It's time you lived for yourself, for us." His eyes flickered with emotion, but he turned away, as though unable to process the depth of what I was saying. I could see the internal battle raging within him, the struggle between loyalty to his family and the desire to finally be free of their grip. "I don't know how to fight this anymore," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We'll find a way, we always do, but we can't do it if you're not willing to fight back. I need you to fight for us, James. Fight for the life we've built together." He finally turned back toward me, his face twisted with pain and confusion. "But what if we lose? What if everything falls apart?" "We're not going to lose," I said firmly. "But we will if you don't fight. You have to choose, James. You have to decide what kind of life you want to live. A life where you're always at the mercy of your mother's control, or a life where you stand up for yourself and for me." There was a long pause. The silence between us was heavy, suffocating. Finally, he spoke, his voice raw but resolute. "You're right. I've been letting her control everything. And I'm done. I'm done living in her shadow." His words hit me like a lifeline. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. But hearing him finally admit that he was ready to fight for us, was a turning point. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was about taking back control of his life, of our life, from the clutches of a woman who had tried to manipulate and control everything. "We'll do this together," I said, stepping closer to him. "We'll fight and we'll win, but only if we stand united." James nodded, his eyes filled with a new sense of determination. "Together," he repeated, his voice firm. "Together." The next day, we went on the offensive. We filed counterclaims against Margaret, accusing her of attempting to manipulate James into abandoning his rightful claims, threatening our livelihood, and using her power over him to control his life. It wasn't a move we made lightly, but it was the only way we could fight back and show her that we wouldn't be intimidated. Our attorney advised that we prepare for a long legal battle, one that could drag on for months, if not longer. But we had no choice. We had to show Margaret that we weren't going to back down. Over the next few days, the atmosphere at home shifted. James was more focused, more determined. But the toll of everything, the legal battles, the pressure, the constant fear of what Margaret might do next, was starting to wear on both of us. I could see it in his eyes, in the way he moved, like a man carrying a weight too heavy for one person to bear. Then, one night, as we were getting ready for bed, I noticed something unusual. James had been unusually quiet all evening, his mind clearly preoccupied with the ongoing battle. But as I sat next to him on the bed, he turned to me with a look I hadn't seen in a long time, guilt and sorrow. "I need to apologize, Laura," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For not seeing what was happening sooner, for letting her control me for so long, and for not being the man you deserve." My heart ached for him. "James, you don't need to apologize. We've been through a lot. But I need you to know that I'm here for you, and I believe in us. I believe we can get through this together." He smiled faintly, his hand reaching out to take mine. "I don't know what I'd do without you. Thank you for standing by me. I promise I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." In that moment, I knew we were finally in this together. We had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The fight for our future had just begun, and we would stop at nothing to win. Margaret may have been powerful, but we had something she didn't, each other. And that was something worth fighting for. The weeks following James's decision to fight back felt like a whirlwind. Each day, the pressure seemed to mount. Each move we made a step closer to the inevitable confrontation with Margaret. I could feel the weight of it, heavy and suffocating, and I could see it in James as well. He had been trying so hard to hold it all together, but the constant strain of the battle was starting to crack him. His energy was fading, his smile rare, his nights filled with restless tossing and turning. Every phone call, every email from his mother's lawyers felt like another punch, another strike against the life we were trying to build. We were constantly looking over our shoulders, expecting the next attack, the next tactic from Margaret. And as the days passed, I could see that it wasn't just the legal battle that was breaking him. It was the emotional toll, the guilt, the fear of losing everything. The man who had once stood beside me, confident and certain of our love, was now filled with self-doubt and hesitation. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling day in court, James came home later than usual. I had been waiting for him, pacing the living room, trying to keep my mind occupied. When he walked in, his face was drained of color, his posture defeated. "James?" I called softly, immediately sensing something was wrong. I rushed over to him, my hand instinctively reaching for his. What happened? He stood there for a moment, staring at me, his eyes distant. He didn't answer right away. The silence between us stretched on, and in that moment, I knew that something had shifted in him, something I couldn't fix with words. The man I had married had lost his fight. It was as if the battle was no longer just with his mother, it was with himself. I can't keep doing this, Laura, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I thought I could fight her. I thought I could handle this, but I'm not strong enough. This is destroying me. It's destroying us. I froze. His words felt like a cold slap to the face. What are you saying? I asked, my heart thudding in my chest. I'm saying I can't do this anymore, he said, his voice breaking. I've been trying to keep up the facade that everything's fine, but it's not. I'm losing myself. I don't know who I am anymore. I've spent so long trying to live up to her expectations, trying to protect her legacy, that I've lost sight of who I really am, who we really are. My throat tightened. James, we're in this together. You're not alone in this. I'm right here. We can get through it. We can beat her. His face softened, but his eyes were filled with despair. I don't know if I have the strength to keep going. I've been battling her for so long that I don't even know what I'm fighting for anymore. I've lost everything, my peace, my happiness, and now I'm losing you too. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on fighting Margaret, on protecting what we had, that I hadn't seen the toll it was taking on him. The fear of losing everything, of being torn apart by a battle he couldn't win, had broken him. And in that moment, I realized that our fight wasn't just against Margaret anymore. It was a fight to save James from himself. I reached for his hand, holding it tightly, my heart aching with every word I spoke. James, look at me. I don't care about the inheritance. I don't care about the estate. I care about you. I care about us. We've fought too hard to let this destroy us. You are not losing me, and you're not losing yourself. I'm here with you every step of the way, but you have to believe in us. You have to believe in you. Tears welled in his eyes, and I could see the vulnerability that had been buried beneath his anger and frustration. I don't know how to do this, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to fight her without losing everything, without losing you. You don't have to fight alone, I said softly, cupping his face in my hands. You don't have to fight at all. I'm with you always. We will fight this together, but we won't lose each other. I won't let you lose yourself. He closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against mine. And for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight in his shoulders begin to lift. It wasn't gone, not yet, but it was lighter. We had both been carrying this battle for so long, but it was time to share the burden, to stop fighting alone. We're going to make it through this, I whispered. We'll find a way. But you have to stay with me. You have to stay for me, for us. James took a deep breath and opened his eyes, looking into mine. For a moment, I could see the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had been lost in the fight, now slowly finding his way back. He nodded slowly, the weight of his decision clear in his gaze. I'm not giving up, he said, his voice steady. Not on us, not on me, and not on you. The next day, James did something he had never done before. He called Margaret. He didn't send her a lawyer's letter or a message through intermediaries. He called her directly, and he demanded that they meet in person. It was time to end this, to stop hiding behind lawyers and threats and face each other face to face. James had finally found his strength again, not in the power he once sought from his family, but in the love and the life we had built together. And this time, it wasn't about winning the fight. It was about standing tall, no matter what came next. When the meeting was arranged, I could feel the tension in the air as if something explosive was about to happen. It was the final confrontation. The moment we would find out just how far Margaret was willing to go to regain control, and whether James was truly ready to let go of the past. But this time, James was no longer the man who had been manipulated into submission. He was a man standing on his own, ready to fight for his future, ready to fight for the woman he loved. And no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for certain. We were finally in control of our own destiny. The day of the meeting arrived, and everything felt like it was hanging in the balance. The tension in the air was almost suffocating. James and I had discussed everything. He was resolute, no longer burdened by the guilt and doubt that had plagued him for weeks. He had made his decision, and there was no turning back. Margaret's mansion loomed in front of us once more, but this time it felt different. This time, it wasn't a fortress of control. It was just a house, a place where the woman who had tried to tear us apart would finally be confronted. We weren't walking in with fear anymore. We were walking in with strength, ready to face whatever she would throw at us. James didn't speak much as we walked to the front door, but his hand in mine was firm, unshakable. We had come so far, and this was the final step. I could feel his heartbeat matching mine, a steady rhythm that told me he was ready. We had fought for this moment, and we would leave that house knowing we had won, no matter what happened inside. When we entered the drawing room, Margaret was already seated at the grand table. She looked as calm as ever, her hands neatly folded in front of her. Her gaze flickered between James and me, a small, almost imperceptible smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. "So we've finally come to this, have we?" she said, her voice smooth, yet laced with something dangerous. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to be so stubborn, James, but here we are." James stood tall, his posture unyielding. "We're not here to fight, Mother," he said, his voice firm. "We're here to put an end to this." I stood next to him, feeling a surge of pride in the way he was handling himself. Gone was the man who had let her control his life. This was the man who had finally found his strength. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Put an end to it? And how do you propose to do that? Do you think you can just walk away from everything I've built? You think this little rebellion of yours will change anything?" James met her gaze, his voice unwavering. "You've spent your whole life controlling everything and everyone around you, including me. But I'm not your puppet anymore, Mother. I'm not going to sacrifice my life, my happiness, for your legacy. I'm going to live my own life, with the woman I love. And if that means walking away from everything, then so be it." For the first time, I saw Margaret falter. There was no retort, no sharp comment, just silence. Her eyes flickered, the coldness in them momentarily replaced by something I couldn't quite place. Perhaps fear, perhaps realization. But before I could analyze it too much, she regained her composure, her face hardening again. "You're making a mistake, James," she said, her voice low, cold. "You'll regret this. You'll regret abandoning everything I've worked for. You'll lose everything." "We've already lost, Mother," James said, taking a step forward. "We've lost years of my life, years of my happiness, but we're not losing each other, and that's all that matters now." There was a long pause, as if Margaret were calculating her next move, weighing the consequences. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to lash out, to make us feel small. But for the first time, I could tell she was realizing that she had no control over us anymore. Then, something surprising happened. Margaret stood up slowly, her expression unreadable. She walked over to the window, staring out at the vast estate beyond. We waited in silence, unsure of what to expect next. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than it had been before. "You think this is over?" she asked, almost to herself. "You think I'll let go just like that?" James didn't flinch. "It's over, Mother, we've made our choice. And we're not turning back." There was a moment where it seemed like Margaret might say something else, might strike out in anger or demand more. But instead, she just stood there, staring out the window. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, but it was different this time. It wasn't the silence of impending conflict, it was the silence of acceptance, of letting go. And then, slowly, Margaret turned back to face us. Her eyes, once so cold and calculating, were now something else, almost resigned. "You've made your decision," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "And I suppose I'll have to accept it." James didn't say anything, but I could see the relief flood his face. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense, but it was a victory all the same. We had stood our ground. We had refused to be controlled any longer. And in that moment, I knew that we had won, not just against Margaret, but against everything that had threatened to tear us apart. Margaret didn't offer any more words of warning, didn't make any more threats. She simply turned, walked out of the room, and left us standing there in the silence of the house that had once been a battleground. James and I exchanged a look, one that spoke volumes. We had done it. We had finally broken free from her grip. We left Margaret's mansion that day, not as victims of her manipulations, but as victors of our own future. The legal battles didn't immediately vanish, but we knew the hardest part was behind us. Margaret had made her last attempt to control us, and we had stood firm. As we walked out into the evening sunlight, hand in hand, I realized that this was only the beginning of the rest of our lives. We had fought for each other, for the love we shared, and now we had the freedom to build the future we wanted, one that was ours, without anyone standing in our way. In the end, it wasn't just about defeating Margaret, it was about reclaiming ourselves. And we had done it, together.